The library stood silent under the velvet cloak of night. Its marble walls, kissed by moonlight, reflected the faint flicker of oil lamps that burned along narrow corridors. Each lamp's flame trembled in the gentle draft, casting slow, dancing shadows on the walls lined with shelves taller than a man's reach. The air smelled faintly of old parchment, ink, and the quiet weight of centuries. In these hours, the library was alive, yet nothing stirred. Scrolls, carefully rolled and bound, seemed to lean toward one another, as if murmuring their secrets. Their whispers were soft, almost inaudible, mere rustles of papyrus that spoke of distant lands, of scholars who once debated and dreamt here. A single feathered quill, abandoned on a desk, shivered under the drafts as if it remembered the hands that once guided it. The corridors stretched endlessly, the steps of a lone custodian echoing slowly, swallowed by the vastness. A clock, long since ceased, had no voice here, for time itself had slowed within these halls. Every scroll, every codex, seemed to hum its own lullaby, a song of knowledge, of stories yet untold, fading gently into shadows. Above, the Mediterranean stars glittered indifferently, distant witnesses to human endeavor. They cast a cool, sleepy light through high windows, touching the edges of vellum and the golden letters of faded manuscripts. Here, wisdom and slumber intertwined. The library did not merely store knowledge, it cradled it, whispered it, and allowed it to rest beneath the watchful stars. The faint rustle of a page turned by an unseen hand reminded the night that the library breathed, ever so quietly. And as the midnight wind carried a soft echo from the port outside, the library settled deeper into its sleep, knowing that in the morning, the scholars would return, unaware of the hushed songs sung in the dark. The library's corridors seemed endless, each turn revealing another room filled with shelves that stretched to unseen heights. The air was thick with the scent of ancient ink and the faint musk of vellum, a fragrance that seemed to lull any visitor into stillness. Every scroll leaned slightly, as though they were listening to one another, exchanging the softest of confidences. Here, time moved slower. Even the footsteps of the night custodian seemed measured, deliberate, as though the walls themselves asked for gentle passage. A tapestry, faded to the color of old tea, shivered under the draught, as if whispering tales of far-off lands it had never seen. Light flickered across golden letters, revealing glimpses of knowledge that had once guided philosophers, poets, and dreamers alike. A soft wind slipped through the latticed windows, carrying with it the distant hum of the Mediterranean waves. It mingled with the faint sigh of parchment, as if the library itself were breathing. Scrolls seemed to lean closer, sharing secrets that had been lost to the clamor of the outside world. And in that hushed communion, even the most restless thoughts of the scholars who had walked these halls long ago found solace. The shadows of the oil lamps danced lazily across the stone floor, tracing the paths of imagined footsteps and long-forgotten conversations. Everything here existed in a gentle suspension, a world balanced between memory and oblivion, where knowledge was not demanded, but cradled in quiet reverence. And as the stars wheeled silently above Alexandria, the library remained, a sleeping heart of wisdom, pulsing softly in the cool night. The library seemed to breathe in the silence, each scroll and codex inhaling the cool night air, exhaling whispers of the past. A gentle hum, almost imperceptible, lingered between the shelves, a melody of human thought frozen in ink. The shadows of the flickering lamp stretched long across the marble floors, curling and unraveling like smoke in a dream. Every scroll held a story, and though no one read them now, their essence floated in the air, a soft, intangible music. Names of kings, distant cities, strange creatures, and celestial wonders drifted lightly, as if the library itself were humming them to sleep. Occasionally, a quill stirred, moving slightly on a desk, guided by invisible hands that remembered the rhythm of long-forgotten writing. Outside, the stars shimmered like silver dust above the Mediterranean, their light filtering in through the high windows. The ocean's gentle sigh reached the walls in faint, echoing waves, merging with the whispers of parchment. The library did not mourn its solitude. Instead, it seemed content in the hush, a sanctuary where stories could drift slowly into memory, where knowledge could dream before the dawn would disturb it. Time seemed to dissolve here. Minutes, hours, even centuries, existed only as faint pulses in the quiet. The library's heart beat softly, in rhythm with the rustling of pages and the sigh of the night wind. And for those who might wander here in dreams, it promised a gentle lullaby of wisdom, a place where history itself could sleep. The farther one wandered into the corridors, the deeper the sense of stillness became. Even the shadows seemed to move in a measured, patient rhythm, curling along walls, stretching across floors, pausing as if listening to some eternal melody. A faint breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying with it a mingling of sea air and ancient paper, weaving an invisible tapestry of smell and sound that was uniquely Alexandria's. It was as though the library were breathing with the world outside, inhaling the gentle night, exhaling the stories it held so tenderly. In one hidden corner, a pile of scrolls sat untouched for centuries, forgotten by time yet preserved by its quiet, patient guardianship. Their edges were browned and delicate, yet the ink shimmered faintly in the lamplight, a testament to the endurance of human curiosity. One could imagine the hands that had held them, tracing letters with care, reading aloud passages that carried the weight of dreams, experiments, prayers, and poetry. Those voices had long since faded, but here, in the hush of night, they lingered as ghostly echoes, soft and slow, inviting the listener to lean in and hear the music of thought itself. The library's vast chambers seemed almost infinite. Corridors branched into more corridors, halls opened into rooms filled with light, shadow, and parchment. Every corner, every niche, was alive with the quiet murmur of history. Scrolls whispered to one another across distances, as though sharing fragments of knowledge, pieces of stories that had once mattered to men and women long gone. The effect was hypnotic. One could walk these halls for hours and feel time dissolve into itself, the present merging seamlessly with centuries past. And yet, despite the enormity of its treasures, the library slept. It did not mourn the absence of scholars or the passage of time. Instead, it cradled knowledge gently, allowing it to rest beneath the indifferent gaze of the stars. Each scroll, each codex, each fragile manuscript was a heart beating slowly in a vast, quiet body. The oil lamps cast gentle halos around the desks, illuminating their precious contents, but never harshly. Nothing here demanded attention. It was a place for dreaming, a sanctuary where history could slumber undisturbed. As the night deepened, the library seemed to draw inward, folding its corridors and chambers into themselves. Every sound became slower, every shadow longer, every whisper fainter. The scent of ink and parchment grew richer in its quiet, as if reminding the world that wisdom could be preserved even in silence. The stars wheeled above, silent witnesses to the ancient vigil, their cool light a lullaby for those who might have once wandered here in search of answers. And in the deepest chamber, where no human foot had trodden for centuries, a single scroll quivered in the faint draft. Its words, though unread, pulsed with quiet life, carrying stories that would perhaps never be spoken aloud. Night had settled over Alexandria like a velvet curtain, and the library lay cloaked in silence, save for the faint whisper of parchment shifting on its shelves. The halls stretched endlessly, their marble floors cool beneath the night air, and the soft flicker of oil lamps painted slow-moving shadows that seemed to drift like lazy clouds. Each corridor, each alcove, each forgotten desk seemed to breathe with its own quiet rhythm, as if the library itself were alive, its pulse measured in the rustling of ancient words. Every scroll seemed to carry a heartbeat. Rolled carefully in faded leather or tied with silken cords, the manuscripts leaned ever so slightly toward one another, as if they were sharing secrets in hushed tones. The air was thick with the scent of ink, dry papyrus, and something else, something indefinable, the essence of memory itself, dense and timeless. You could almost hear the soft hum of scholars who had long since passed, their voices lingering faintly in the spaces between shelves, caught in invisible threads that wound through the library like gentle tendrils of smoke. A quill rested on a desk, its tip dipped in faint traces of dried ink. Though no hand had moved it for decades, a subtle tremor seemed to pulse along its shaft, as if the memory of writing still lingered, like a faint heartbeat that refused to die. Pages fluttered softly, perhaps moved by a draft, perhaps stirred by the sigh of the library itself. Each rustle was a whisper, a fragment of knowledge, a fleeting story, a dream that had once belonged to a scholar or poet. These echoes hung in the air like starlight suspended in the quiet, waiting to be discovered by ears attuned to the music of sleep. The lamplight flickered across the gilded letters of manuscripts, revealing glimpses of secrets that had been treasured for centuries. Maps of distant lands stretched across fragile parchment, their edges curled like gentle waves. Diagrams of celestial spheres, drawn with painstaking care, shimmered softly, catching the faint glow of the oil lamps. Every detail, every carefully inked line, seemed to hum with life, vibrating gently in harmony with the rhythm of the night. Outside, the Mediterranean whispered against the harbor, its soft sigh carried up to the high windows of the library. The stars above glittered in serene silence, reflecting their silver light upon the marble floors, creating a mosaic of quiet luminescence. The walls of the library, worn smooth by centuries of touch, absorbed this light and released it slowly, gently, like a dream that unfolds with deliberate calm. The night here was not merely darkness, it was a slow, deliberate embrace, wrapping around every scroll, every shelf, every quiet corner where wisdom slept. The library's silence was never complete. Beneath the steady glow of oil lamps, there existed a subtler, quieter music, a murmuring that slipped through the shelves like a gentle breeze. Scrolls leaned close to one another, bound in cracked leather or fragile vellum, and in that closeness, they shared the faintest of secrets. It was a conversation too soft for human ears, yet it hummed in the air, weaving a delicate tapestry of forgotten stories and half-remembered knowledge. Each scroll had its own voice. Some whispered the histories of kings who had long vanished beneath the sands, others recited the philosophies of thinkers whose names were now dust. There were texts of astronomy that traced constellations across parchment, and others that murmured of faraway seas and strange lands. These whispers intertwined, overlapping and folding into each other, like a river of stories flowing silently through the night. The oil lamps flickered, their light brushing across gilded letters and intricate diagrams. Shadows twined between the shelves, stretching, twisting, and unspooling, as if listening. Occasionally, a scroll would tremble slightly, rolling ever so subtly, as if leaning toward its neighbor to hear more clearly. The air seemed alive with tiny motions, the whisper of a page, the faint shuffle of parchment, the slow, rhythmic sigh of history settling deeper into sleep. In a corner, a dusty pile of scrolls murmured softly, their voices threading together into a song that had not been heard for centuries. Names of philosophers, poets, and explorers floated like motes of golden light, brushing past desks and quills, brushing past the high, arched windows where the moon cast silver patterns on the marble floors. The Mediterranean breeze carried the faintest hints of salt and distant waves, mixing with the fragrance of ink and paper to create a scent that seemed to hum with memory. Here, time had no hurry. Each whisper was elongated, deliberate, unhurried, as if every syllable could linger in the air for hours before fading. A scroll might repeat a story it had once told a scholar, then pause, then whisper it again in a slightly altered form, as though the library itself encouraged variation, play, and reflection. Knowledge here was not a possession, it was a gentle, living rhythm, a pulse that moved through the shelves, bending to the cadence of the night. Occasionally, a quill would twitch, leaving a faint ink mark on the parchment beside it. Perhaps it was the memory of a hand long gone, a remnant of a thought unfinished. The scrolls would respond softly, rustling as if in approval or agreement. Even the marble walls seemed to hum faintly in response, carrying the whispers along corridors and across distant halls. And always, above it all, the stars wheeled silently over Alexandria, witnessing the soft murmurs of knowledge as it drifted quietly toward eternity. Nearby, a series of philosophical texts murmured softly, debating ideas and truths with a patient cadence, their rustling echoing faintly through the corridors like a muted river. Each whisper added to the tapestry of knowledge, layering thought upon thought, question upon question, idea upon idea. Even the walls seemed to participate, absorbing the whispers and releasing them slowly, as if the library had learned the rhythm of its own heartbeat. Every corner, every shelf, every narrow hallway became a conduit for stories, stretching endlessly into the night. The effect was hypnotic. One could close one's eyes and imagine the voices of the scrolls weaving together into a single, soft song, a lullaby of human curiosity, memory, and imagination. Time in these shadowed halls felt elastic, stretching and folding upon itself. Minutes dissolved into hours, and hours became indistinguishable from centuries. The scrolls did not age in this quiet, they only whispered, each movement a delicate brushstroke of memory. And above it all, the stars wheeled silently outside, their cool, unblinking light illuminating the marble floors in silver streaks. They bore witness to the library's nocturnal conversations, indifferent yet reverent, like cosmic listeners to a lullaby older than any human voice. Even the tiniest of movements carried meaning. A single feathered quill would tremble in rhythm with a distant rustle of parchment. A stack of scrolls might shift slightly, nudged by the soft pressure of leaning neighbors. The library itself seemed aware, a patient, silent guardian ensuring that nothing disturbed the delicate ballet of whispers. Knowledge here did not demand attention. It existed quietly, persistently, in a rhythm that could soothe the soul, a lullaby composed of centuries of thought. And as the night deepened, the whispers folded into themselves, slowing, stretching, elongating like smoke rising toward a distant ceiling. Each sound was a soft invitation, listen closely, and you may remember what was once forgotten. Lean in, and you may dream of what cannot yet be told. In these moments, the library was not merely a collection of scrolls, it was a living, breathing organism, pulsing softly in the stillness, cradling human curiosity in its endless, gentle embrace. The library itself seemed aware of this chorus, embracing it. It welcomed the murmurs and amplified them in subtle ways, a draft that moved just so to turn a page, a lamp flicker that brushed letters into momentary brilliance, shadows that curled protectively around the most delicate manuscripts. Nothing here was hurried, nothing was loud. Every movement, every whisper, every sigh of parchment was a part of the library's slow, deliberate heartbeat. To those who might imagine visiting, the scene would appear motionless, almost lifeless. But for the scrolls themselves, the library was awake in its own peculiar way, a quiet, pulsing intelligence that hummed beneath the surface, cradling centuries of human curiosity, guarding them in whispers. And as midnight deepened, as the Mediterranean wind drifted through the tall windows, the murmurs grew softer, folding into the hush of the night, as if the library itself was preparing its treasures for the next visitor, the next curious mind that would one day awaken its gentle, whispering chorus. The deeper corridors of the library held a softer, almost secretive music. Here, where the shelves leaned close and shadows pooled in corners, the scrolls spoke in a language of sighs and shuffles. Each manuscript seemed aware of the others, leaning, tilting, and rustling just enough to share fragments of forgotten worlds. Their whispers were not loud, not demanding attention, they were gentle murmurs, meant for those who had the patience to listen. The oil lamps flickered with a tender hesitance, casting warm pools of light that barely touched the tops of the shelves. Shadows pooled in the spaces between, curling like smoke, twisting around marble columns and reaching toward the vaulted ceilings. In these shadows, the whispers became more pronounced, carrying fragments of stories that had been written in distant lands, by hands that had long since returned to dust. A fragment of a poem drifted from one shelf to another, the edge of a map trembled as though pointing toward a city lost to time. The library's air was filled with the soft rustle of parchment, a sound that seemed almost musical in its regularity. It was a symphony of slow motion, pages turning ever so slightly, scrolls settling into their cradles, quills that twitched as if remembering their purpose. The scent of ink and dried papyrus mingled with a faint hint of the Mediterranean breeze that slipped in through tall, latticed windows. Together, these subtle cues created a lullaby of knowledge, a slow rhythm that could soothe the most restless mind. In one shadowed corner, a collection of astronomical scrolls whispered in unison. They murmured of stars and constellations, of planets and the silent movements of the heavens. Their voices were gentle but insistent, carrying the secrets of distant skies across the library's sleeping halls. The whispers of the library never ceased. They moved softly through the halls, slipping over marble floors, curling around the edges of ancient shelves, and folding into the quiet corners where no human foot had stepped for centuries. Here, every scroll had a story, and every story seemed to float, untethered, as if it had taken on the delicate weightlessness of a dream. Some scrolls whispered of kings and queens whose names had been swallowed by time, of battles fought on distant shores, of cities lost beneath sand and sea. Others murmured poems that had once been read aloud in halls filled with flickering torchlight, their cadence slow and deliberate, designed to linger in the mind like a half-remembered melody. Each fragment floated on the air, brushing softly against other scrolls, blending, folding, repeating itself in gentle echoes that carried across the silent library. The oil lamps flickered as if nodding in quiet agreement, their flames bending and bowing to the rhythm of the murmurs. Shadows danced languidly along the walls, stretching long and curling like smoke caught in a lazy spiral. A faint breeze drifted in from the high windows, carrying the subtle scent of the Mediterranean with it, a mixture of salt, distant waves, and the faint musk of inked parchment. It stirred the scrolls just enough for their stories to drift, brushing past desks and quills, teasing the edges of maps and diagrams that held the knowledge of distant lands. Some nights, it seemed the scrolls whispered not just to each other, but to the library itself. The walls absorbed their stories and released them slowly, letting them echo through corridors in waves of quiet, undulating rhythm. One could imagine walking these halls and hearing fragments of forgotten conversations, the voices of scholars long gone, philosophers debating in hushes, poets reading verses aloud to no one. The stories were alive in a gentle, patient way, like water rippling in a still pond, each wave carrying another fragment of memory. Occasionally, a scroll would quiver as if eager to share its tale, sending ripples of sound across its neighbors. A distant shelf would respond with its own story, and soon the corridor would be filled with overlapping whispers, a symphony of dreams woven from ink and papyrus. Time seemed irrelevant here. Minutes, hours, even centuries drifted together in slow motion, carried along by the persistent, unhurried rhythm of memory itself. The quills, resting on scattered desks, sometimes twitched in response, leaving faint ink marks that traced patterns like constellations across blank parchments. It was as though the library encouraged its inhabitants, living or not, to contribute to the eternal chorus. Each mark, each rustle, each whispered syllable became part of a slow, sleepy dance that spanned the length of the Mediterranean night. Outside, the stars glimmered with quiet patience. Their cool, silver light spilled through high windows, illuminating the whispering scrolls in a soft, celestial glow. The library welcomed this light, letting it mingle with the lamplight in a slow, harmonious pulse. Every shadow, every flicker, every gentle breath of the night was absorbed, woven into the continuous lullaby of knowledge. The library was not dead, it was dreaming. And in its dreams, all stories were free to drift, unhurried, eternal, like clouds moving across a twilight sky. And as the night deepened further, the whispers slowed, curling inward, forming soft pockets of silence between bursts of murmurs. It was a rhythm meant to lull, to soothe, to cradle thought into rest. Anyone wandering these corridors in sleep or in dream would find themselves carried along, weightless, through centuries of wisdom, history, poetry, and philosophy. In this suspended time, the scrolls were not merely objects, they were companions, guardians of memory, each story a thread in a gentle web of infinite quietude. The library existed in this eternal nocturne, its heart beating softly beneath the marble floors and vaulted ceilings. And in that heart, the whispers of papyrus and ink, of dreams and half-remembered voices, continued their endless drift, soft, patient, hypnotic, inviting all who listened to join in the slow, meditative embrace of Alexandria's eternal night. The library's whispers had deepened now, no longer mere murmurs drifting across shelves. They had grown into a soft crescendo, a lullaby composed by centuries of thought, memory, and imagination. Every scroll leaned just slightly, their parchment edges quivering, releasing gentle waves of sound that intertwined with one another. The effect was not chaotic, but deliberate, a quiet symphony that filled every corner, every alcove, every hidden niche of the library. Oil lamps flickered gently, their flames swaying in a rhythm almost imperceptibly tied to the breath of the building itself. Shadows moved along the marble floors like slow, liquid dancers, curling and unfurling across arches, shelves, and desks. The air was thick with the scent of ink and vellum, sweetened faintly by dust that had settled over centuries. In the hush, even the faintest rustle of parchment seemed to resonate, carrying knowledge and memory across vast spaces in waves as soft as the ripple of water. Some scrolls whispered of distant empires, of markets where merchants bartered for spices and silk, of caravans that crept along desert sands beneath starlit skies. Others murmured of philosophers and poets, of the slow unfolding of ideas that had shaped entire generations. Each story drifted into another, folding over itself like smoke curling lazily in a sunbeam, creating patterns that were invisible yet deeply felt. Every fragment was a thread in an invisible tapestry, woven not with hands, but with the gentle pulse of history itself. The walls of the library seemed to pulse in response. Each column, each archway, each high window absorbed the whispers and returned them softened, magnified in quiet resonance. The sound of knowledge became a tangible presence, wrapping the entire building in a cocoon of thought and memory. Occasionally, a quill stirred, leaving a faint mark on blank parchment, as if compelled by the hushed conversations around it. The ink traced invisible patterns, delicate constellations of ideas, adding another subtle layer to the infinite song that filled the night. Outside, the Mediterranean slept under a quilt of stars. Moonlight spilled through latticed windows, brushing across marble floors, gilded letters, and worn shelves. The soft silver light mingled with the amber glow of the lamps, creating a serene, hypnotic atmosphere. The air was alive with quiet motion, the gentle flutter of pages, the whisper of drafts, the slow sway of hanging tapestries. Each sound, each movement, was part of the library's ongoing symphony, a meditation that spanned centuries and yet was wholly present in that single night. Time had become irrelevant. Hours stretched into centuries, and centuries folded into the silent heartbeat of the building. Each whisper carried with it not just the words of the past, but the echoes of the human curiosity that had created them. Here, history was not static. It breathed, shifted, and moved with a soft, deliberate rhythm. It did not demand attention, it invited it, coaxing those who listened into a state of quiet contemplation, a meditative trance that hovered on the edge of sleep. The crescendo of whispers gradually softened, folding into a slower, deeper rhythm. It was as if the library itself had begun to drift into slumber, every scroll, codex, and parchment settling into its cradle, humming faintly as it surrendered to rest. The quills twitched less often, the pages fluttered more slowly, the lamp's flames dimmed imperceptibly. Shadows coiled into themselves, stretching long and then fading, merging with the dim glow of the moonlight. Even the walls seemed to sigh softly, a final exhalation of all the centuries of knowledge they had held within. And in that soft, enveloping silence, the library became more than stone, more than parchment, more than ink. It became a living memory, a guardian of human thought, a vessel of dreams. The whispers, now gentle as a mother's lullaby, invited anyone who entered, even in imagination, to lean in, to breathe slowly, to let the pulse of history lull them into gentle sleep. Each story, each fragment of knowledge, drifted into the mind like a cloud, weightless and serene, carrying with it the calm certainty that wisdom, even when unseen, was never truly lost. The stars above Alexandria sparkled in quiet witness. The Mediterranean wind whispered against the walls and through the open windows, carrying fragments of stories out to sea, letting them mingle with the dreams of faraway lands. The library at night was a world of shadows, slow-moving and deliberate. The oil lamps flickered softly along the corridors, their light bending across marble floors and tall shelves filled with scrolls. Every flame seemed alive, swaying gently in the night drafts, casting moving patterns that stretched and shrank along the walls. Shadows twisted like liquid smoke, curling around pillars, coiling over desks, and dancing lazily along the edges of ancient manuscripts. The shelves themselves seemed to respond to the flickers, leaning slightly, as if stretching to catch the light or to whisper more closely to their neighbors. Each scroll, each codex, seemed to hold a shadow of its own, a private darkness that deepened whenever the lamp wavered. The library's silence was filled with these shapes, a quiet ballet of forms that moved independently of the human eye. In the alcoves, quills rested on scattered parchments, twitching faintly, as if stirred by invisible hands. A single feathered quill cast a long, delicate shadow across a map of distant lands. The edges of parchments curled, catching the light in a subtle glow, their golden letters shimmering and fading as the flames trembled. The shadows danced with them, weaving between pages, creating fleeting patterns that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Even the walls seemed aware of the flickering light. Cracks and carvings appeared to deepen, revealing the library's hidden textures, subtle as a sigh. Shadows pooled in niches and corners, forming shapes that hinted at movement, perhaps the memory of a long-gone scholar, perhaps the echo of a quill tracing letters across a page. Everything here was slowed, deliberate, hypnotic. The night seemed to stretch, elongating moments, so that the smallest flicker of light could last for minutes, drawing the observer deeper into the library's quiet rhythm. A breeze drifted through the high, latticed windows, stirring the lamps ever so slightly. It carried the soft scent of the Mediterranean, blending with the musk of aged parchment and ink. The shadows shifted with the gentle currents of air, their dance merging with the whispers of scrolls, forming a delicate symphony of movement and sound. The effect was mesmerizing. One could wander these corridors and feel the night itself breathing around them, every flicker of flame and curve of shadow a heartbeat in the library's slow, sleeping pulse. In this quiet the mind began to blur the line between shadow and form, between the flickering shapes and the stories they reflected. Every movement seemed to tell a tale. A map of distant lands hinted at journeys across deserts and seas, a quill's shadow traced the shape of a forgotten poem, a curled parchment suggested the hush of a philosophical debate long past. The library at night was alive not with sound, but with light and shadow, the heartbeat of memory manifested in fleeting flickering shapes that invited contemplation, reflection, and gentle surrender to sleep. And as the Mediterranean stars wheeled silently overhead, their silver light mingling with the amber glow of lamps, the shadows seemed to stretch forever, guiding the mind into the library's calm embrace. Here, in the slow sway of flame and form, history rested, dreams whispered, and the heart of Alexandria slept. In the deeper halls of the library, shadows moved with a quiet autonomy, stretching along the shelves and curling around the edges of ancient scrolls. The oil lamps flickered faintly, sending warm, trembling light across marble floors and carved pillars. Every wavering flame reshaped the shadows, transforming them into slow, deliberate dancers that stretched and shrank in rhythm with the gentle currents of air drifting through high windows. The scrolls themselves seemed to acknowledge these flickers. Their edges shifted slightly in response, rustling softly, a whisper accompanying every movement. It was as though the library had created a choreography of light and shade, where shadows were participants in a silent performance. Columns of parchment and stacks of codices swayed gently in the unseen draft, their faint murmurs blending seamlessly with the slow dance of shapes across the walls. Every shadow told a story. A quill left resting on a desk cast a long, thin shadow across an open map of distant lands, as if drawing invisible lines between cities long forgotten. A stack of scrolls in the corner leaned toward the light, revealing delicate golden letters that glimmered and faded in time with the flickering flames. The shapes were fluid, almost hypnotic, creating patterns that encouraged the mind to wander freely through the corridors of history, tracing paths of thought and memory without effort or urgency. The walls themselves participated in this quiet ballet. Faded carvings and cracks shifted subtly under the trembling lamplight, forming suggestions of arches, windows, or mysterious figures. Shadows pooled and merged, curling around corners and archways, folding back into themselves. Occasionally, a scroll would tremble in response, sending a ripple through its neighbors, as if the shadows themselves were conducting the whispers of knowledge. Every flicker, every rustle, every quiet pulse of air contributed to the library's hypnotic rhythm. A faint Mediterranean breeze drifted through the latticed windows, carrying with it the cool scent of night and the distant sea. It brushed against the lamps, nudged parchment edges, and shifted shadows gently, elongating some, shortening others, blending movement and sound into a soft, meditative symphony. The library felt alive, not in the way a person is alive, but in the way a dream breathes, slow, patient, fluid. The interplay of light, shadow, and whispered stories became a single entity, a serene organism of memory and imagination. The quiet motion of shadows encouraged contemplation. One could walk these halls in thought, letting the shapes guide the mind through centuries of human endeavor. A quill's shadow might suggest a poet composing verses, a curled scroll might echo the hush of a philosopher's debate, a long shadow along a corridor could evoke the march of armies or the sway of distant seas. In this slow, deliberate darkness, every detail carried weight, every flicker invited reflection. And as the Mediterranean stars wheeled silently overhead, their silver light mingling with the amber glow of lamps, the shadows seemed to lengthen and stretch further, drawing the mind deeper into the library's calm embrace. In the interplay of darkness and light, of whispers and movements, Alexandria's heart beat softly, and all within it, scrolls, shadows, and stories, rested together in the gentle rhythm of a timeless night. The deeper one wandered into the library, the more the shadows seemed to have lives of their own. They moved with a quiet purpose, stretching along marble floors, curling around scroll-laden shelves, and folding into niches where even the faintest light could not reach. Oil lamps flickered, and every quiver of flame reshaped the shadows, forming fleeting figures that suggested movement, dialogue, and memory. In the stillness of the night, these shapes became storytellers. The scrolls whispered softly to one another, and the shadows responded in kind. A shadow would stretch across a stack of parchments, and the rustling pages would murmur back, as though acknowledging an unspoken conversation. Shadows curved around desks where quills rested, forming arcs and spirals, tracing imaginary ink lines in the air. Sometimes, the flutter of a page would send a ripple through the shadows, creating patterns that suggested arches, windows, or the faint silhouettes of figures long gone. It was as if the library itself had learned to speak in light and dark, and its language was slow, deliberate, and mesmerizing. In one secluded corner, a group of scrolls leaned toward a flickering lamp, golden letters shimmering softly in the wavering glow. The shadows responded, twisting like smoke to touch each manuscript, carrying the faintest echoes of their stories across the aisle. Fragments of poetry brushed against histories of far-off lands, philosophical musings merged with diagrams of stars, and each motion carried a delicate rhythm, slow and hypnotic. The library's corridors became a theater of whispered knowledge and dancing darkness, where every quiver of shadow conveyed a hidden tale. Even the walls seemed to participate. Carved reliefs and faded inscriptions caught the trembling light, their shadows stretching across shelves and floors in intricate patterns. The shadows pooled in alcoves, merged along arches, and then receded into silence, only to return as if they had paused to draw breath. Every flicker, every rustle of parchment, every subtle sway of a curtain in the Mediterranean breeze added to the library's symphony. It was a music without notes, a dance without performers, yet profoundly alive. Time itself seemed to dissolve. Hours could stretch into centuries, and the mind might wander without realizing the passing of moments. Shadows traced patterns across the mind as much as the library, guiding thoughts into corridors of memory and imagination. A quill's shadow might evoke a scholar composing verses, a long flickering shape might suggest the echo of a caravan crossing a desert under starlight. Each movement carried meaning, soft and unhurried, an invitation to surrender to the rhythm of night. As the Mediterranean stars wheeled silently above, silver light streamed through the high latticed windows, mingling with the warm amber glow of lamps. The shadows merged with the moonlight, stretching endlessly, blurring the line between reality and dream. In that quiet, every whispered story, every gentle motion, and every flicker of shade became part of a slow, hypnotic lullaby. The library was alive not with sound, but with presence, a heartbeat of memory, thought, and quiet wonder. Here, in the interplay of shadows and whispers, Alexandria slept. And for anyone wandering these halls, the library offered the softest of invitations, to breathe slowly, to let the mind drift, to surrender to the gentle cadence of centuries, and to dream alongside the stories, the shadows, and the light. By the deepest hours of the night, the library had become a world suspended between dream and memory. Shadows stretched and curled with an almost sentient grace, tracing the lines of shelves, arches, and scrolls with a gentle rhythm that seemed to mirror the heartbeat of time itself. Oil lamps flickered lazily, their amber glow merging with silver moonlight that spilled through the latticed windows. Every quiver of flame cast new shapes, and every shape seemed to sway in quiet harmony with the whispers of the scrolls. The corridors were alive in subtle ways. Parchments rustled faintly, quills twitched, and even the marble floors seemed to exhale in measured breaths. Shadows merged and parted, rising along the walls like slow, liquid dancers before dissolving into pools of darkness. The library's arches and columns became vessels for this gentle dance, bending the light and shade into an endless procession that flowed without urgency, without demand, carrying the mind into a state of serene contemplation. Even the walls took part, absorbing light and shadow, amplifying whispers in subtle echoes that carried down long corridors. Niches and alcoves became stages for silent performances, a quivering curtain suggested the flutter of a scholar's robe, a pooled shadow traced the slow gestures of a philosopher's hand. Every detail, no matter how minute, was part of the library's deliberate, gentle symphony. The rhythm was unhurried, and the effect was mesmerizing, guiding anyone present toward the soft edge of sleep. Outside, the Mediterranean stars wheeled silently over Alexandria, their cold silver light mingling with the warm flicker of lamps to create a quiet, celestial harmony. The faint scent of sea air drifted in, mingling with the must of parchment and ink, carrying the whispers of the library into the night. Each movement, of shadow, of scroll, of lamp flame, was an invitation to pause, to breathe slowly, and to let the mind surrender to the slow, meditative pulse of centuries. And in this delicate interplay of light, shadow, and whispered stories, the library reached a state of perfect stillness. Shadows coiled into themselves, the parchment rustling slowed to a faint sigh, and the flames of the lamps flickered gently before settling into steady, quiet glow. The whispers of the scrolls softened into murmurs, and the entire building seemed to fold in upon itself, cradling every story, every thought, and every fragment of memory within its vast, marble embrace. In that profound silence, the library became more than walls and books. It became a sanctuary of thought and dream, a vessel for centuries of human curiosity. Here, shadows, light, and whispers moved together in perfect harmony, lulling the mind into a state of serene meditation. Time seemed to pause, and the heart of Alexandria beat softly in the quiet. The library slept. And in its sleep, every story, every shadow, every flicker of flame became part of a silent lullaby that stretched through the night, carrying with it the calm, patient, infinite rhythm of history itself. By the quietest hour of the night, the library seemed to take on a new kind of life. The oil lamps that lined the marble corridors flickered lazily, and a subtle, unseen current of air began to carry tiny lights, floating lanterns, warm and golden, that drifted just above the shelves. They bobbed gently, casting halos of light across parchment, scrolls, and codices, illuminating letters that had long slept beneath centuries of dust. Each lantern glowed as though it contained the memory of a single story, and every flicker seemed tied to a whisper or a rustling page. The shadows responded to the lantern's drift, stretching and curling in slow, fluid motions. Marble columns and arches caught the floating light in unpredictable ways, painting shifting patterns that moved like slow rivers across the floors. The scrolls leaned subtly toward the lanterns, edges trembling as if absorbing their warmth, the faint rustle of parchment blending with the gentle hum of illumination. It was as though the light itself carried stories, gliding above the shelves and casting the library into a calm, hypnotic reverie. Some lanterns lingered near open desks where quills rested, faintly twitching as if stirred by unseen fingers. Their soft glow brushed golden letters across maps, diagrams, and poetry, illuminating histories of kings, distant lands, and philosophers' dreams. A map of faraway cities shimmered as a lantern hovered near it, tracing invisible paths for caravans and explorers. Shadows and light intertwined, creating a delicate dance that invited the mind to drift, following the gentle curves of illumination and the slow rustle of pages. The air was thick with a mixture of scents, the must of centuries-old parchment, the faint sweetness of ink, and the subtle, salty breath of the Mediterranean drifting through high windows. Every inhalation seemed to pull the observer further into the library's embrace, where time itself became fluid, stretching to the rhythm of floating lights and whispering scrolls. The lantern's slow, deliberate motion made the library feel alive, not with sound, but with presence, a gentle, meditative awareness that existed between light and shadow. Along the high shelves, scrolls and codices seemed to glow faintly under the drifting lanterns. Philosophical texts hummed softly with thought, historical scrolls whispered of vanished empires, and poetic fragments floated in the air like delicate notes in an invisible melody. Every lantern acted as a bridge between past and present, carrying the memory of human curiosity and imagination through the calm night. Shadows moved with them, lengthening and folding in harmony, forming shapes that hinted at figures, landscapes, or symbols that had long been forgotten. And as the Mediterranean stars wheeled silently above the city, silver light mingled with the warm glow of the floating lanterns. The corridors of the library seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with gentle, drifting illumination, moving slowly like thoughts in a dream. In this serene, hypnotic space, the whispers of scrolls, the flicker of flames, and the sway of lanterns became one continuous lullaby, soothing, unhurried, and deeply meditative. The library exhaled softly. Every light, every shadow, every gentle movement carried the essence of centuries into the night. And in that quiet, drifting brilliance, Alexandria rested, its heart alive with stories, softly cradled by the gentle, floating lanterns that carried dreams through the silent, eternal halls. The floating lanterns drifted gently through the library's corridors, carrying their soft, golden light across marble floors and towering shelves. Each lantern seemed to pulse with quiet energy, responding to the whispers of the scrolls that lined the aisles. Pages rustled softly in recognition, their edges trembling as if stretching toward the warm illumination. It was a delicate conversation, invisible yet profoundly present, a dialogue of light and sound, of shadow and memory. Some lanterns lingered near clusters of open scrolls, brushing softly against maps of faraway lands, diagrams of celestial bodies, and pages of poetry. The light caressed each letter, making golden symbols shimmer faintly, as if coaxing the stories into being. The scrolls responded with gentle rustles, whispering fragments of verse, history, and philosophy into the air. The whispers carried through the corridors, following the lantern's paths, intertwining with the shadows that stretched and curled along marble floors and arches. Quills twitched as if stirred by unseen hands, leaving faint traces of ink that glimmered in the lantern light. Shadows elongated and shifted in harmony with the drifting illumination, forming patterns on walls and floors that suggested figures moving gracefully across time. One could almost imagine scholars and poets wandering through these shapes, their gestures frozen and fluid at once, replaying centuries of thought in a quiet, ethereal dance. The air itself seemed alive with the gentle movement of light and sound. A faint Mediterranean breeze drifted in through the high latticed windows, brushing past the lamps and lanterns, carrying the subtle scent of salt, ink, and parchment. Each flicker of flame, each sway of a lantern, and each rustle of parchment became part of a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The library felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with sound. It breathed through shadows, through drifting light, through the quiet pulse of centuries of knowledge. Some lanterns floated near the taller shelves, illuminating scrolls that had not been touched for generations. As the golden light brushed across the parchment, the whispers became more distinct, as if the lanterns had awoken them from a long slumber. Histories of forgotten empires murmured softly, philosophical debates echoed in gentle waves, and fragments of poetry swirled in the quiet air like drifting motes of gold. The light seemed to carry the stories, moving them delicately from shelf to shelf, weaving a path of memory through the serene darkness. Above, the stars over Alexandria wheeled silently, silver and still. Their cool light mingled with the warm glow of lanterns, creating an atmosphere of calm wonder. Shadows stretched and folded, brushing along walls and floors, intertwining with the drifting stories and flickering illumination. Each movement, each whisper, each pulse of light was a note in a slow, meditative lullaby, inviting the mind to drift, unhurried and weightless, through centuries of human thought. And as the night deepened further, the library seemed to exhale softly. Lanterns floated lazily, rustling scrolls whispered gently, shadows curled in elegant patterns, and the faint scent of Mediterranean air mingled with the musk of parchment. In this suspended moment, Alexandria's library became a sanctuary of memory and imagination, where light, shadow, and whispering stories merged into a serene, hypnotic rhythm, an eternal, drifting lullaby for all who entered, awake or in dream. As the night deepened, the floating lanterns drifted more deliberately through the library, almost as if they carried purpose beyond mere illumination. Each lantern hovered above a particular shelf or open desk, gently coaxing the scrolls into murmurs that swirled around the air like delicate ribbons. The whispers, once soft and scattered, now followed the lantern's movements, forming patterns that moved slowly through corridors, tracing invisible pathways through centuries of knowledge. Shadows stretched in response, elongating along marble floors and curling around arches in a quiet, elegant dance. Quills on desks twitched faintly, leaving wisps of ink that glimmered under the lantern's soft glow, forming delicate, fleeting shapes that seemed to trace the lantern's paths. Each scroll leaned gently toward the drifting lights, and in that subtle motion, it seemed the library itself was participating in the careful choreography. The interaction of light, shadow, and whisper created a mesmerizing rhythm, slow and deliberate, inviting anyone present to sink deeper into stillness. Some lanterns lingered near particularly old and fragile scrolls, bathing their faded letters in a golden glow. These manuscripts whispered slowly, almost reverently, their voices barely audible but distinct. The lanterns seemed to encourage them, guiding their murmurs into the corridors, where shadows shaped and folded the stories into gentle arcs. A map of a lost city shimmered faintly as a lantern passed, tracing invisible streets and pathways. A philosophical treatise breathed softly in rhythm with a floating flame, and a fragment of poetry glimmered like dust motes in the lamp's light. Above the library, the stars wheeled silently across the night sky, silver light blending subtly with the golden glow of the lanterns. Together, the celestial and human-made illumination formed a delicate tapestry of slow, meditative light. Shadows curved gracefully along the marble floors and arches, each one perfectly synchronized with the drifting lanterns and the whispering scrolls. Time itself seemed suspended in this gentle harmony, stretching moments into minutes, minutes into hours, and hours into timeless sleep. In this serene, drifting illumination, the library became a sanctuary of memory, imagination, and infinite patience. The lanterns guided the whispers of centuries, the shadows traced their delicate choreography, and the quills and scrolls participated in a quiet, hypnotic dance. Every element moved together in slow, unhurried rhythm, creating a dreamlike atmosphere, a lullaby of light and shadow that invited the mind to drift, unburdened, through Alexandria's eternal night. By the deepest hour of the night, the library had settled into a rhythm of quiet wonder. Floating lanterns drifted through the corridors with deliberate slowness, each halo of golden light casting gentle patterns across shelves and marble floors. Shadows curled and stretched in harmony with the lanterns, forming ephemeral shapes that hinted at long-forgotten scholars, philosophers, and poets. The air was thick with the subtle scent of parchment, ink, and the distant Mediterranean, blending with the warm glow of light to create a hypnotic, serene atmosphere. The scrolls leaned toward the lanterns as though drawn by their illumination, rustling softly to respond. Whispers that had once been scattered now moved with purpose, following the lantern's paths in delicate, swirling currents. Poetry brushed history, philosophy embraced astronomy, and stories of distant lands mingled in a quiet symphony. Each shadow, each ripple of light, each tremor of parchment became part of the library's lullaby, a rhythm so slow and patient that the mind could scarcely resist drifting alongside it. Quills on scattered desks twitched faintly, leaving thin traces of ink that glimmered in the lantern light. The faint marks seemed almost alive, tracing delicate arcs, spirals, and invisible lines that echoed the movement of drifting stories. Shadows coiled and uncoiled along arches and columns, forming transient shapes that faded and reformed in perfect harmony with the floating illumination. It was a dance without music, yet profoundly alive, an interplay of presence and memory, of thought and dream, unhurried and infinite. The lantern's glow pooled in corners and alcoves, casting warm, golden light on scrolls that had slept untouched for centuries. Each manuscript whispered slowly, its voice a soft thread in the library's larger tapestry. A map shimmered faintly as a lantern passed, revealing paths of traders and travelers long forgotten. A fragment of poetry floated delicately into the air, its syllables catching on the edges of shadows. Philosophical musings curved along the marble walls, guided by light, tracing invisible arcs that invited the mind to wander in serenity. Outside, the stars wheeled silently across the night sky, their silver beams filtering through high latticed windows. The cool moonlight mingled with the warm glow of lanterns, creating an ethereal, balanced illumination. Shadows stretched and merged, brushing against floors, walls, and pillars, folding the whispers of the library into a soft, meditative chorus. Time itself seemed to pause, held gently in the slow rhythm of floating light, curling shadows, and murmuring scrolls. As the night deepened further, the lanterns slowed their drift, hovering near clusters of scrolls as if cradling the stories within. The whispers softened to gentle murmurs, shadows settled into elegant folds, and the entire library seemed to exhale, folding all its knowledge, memory, and imagination into a single, serene heartbeat. Every element, the quills, the scrolls, the floating lanterns, the shadows, even the marble itself, merged into a quiet, hypnotic harmony. In that profound stillness, Alexandria rested. The library, with all its light, shadow, and whispers, became a sanctuary not only of memory but of dreams. Floating lanterns illuminated centuries, shadows held them gently, and the whispers of stories wove a lullaby that stretched endlessly through the quiet corridors. And in this eternal rhythm, the heart of the library beat slowly, steadily, inviting all who entered to drift, to dream, and to sleep beneath the timeless embrace of Alexandria's night. By the quietest hour of the night, the library seemed to hold its breath. The floating lanterns of the previous nights had drifted on elsewhere, leaving corridors bathed in a softer, gentler glow. Oil lamps flickered faintly along marble floors, casting trembling shadows that curled around shelves filled with scrolls and codices. But now, a new kind of sound, or perhaps presence, had begun to emerge, the whispers of forgotten voices. These were not the voices of scholars long celebrated or philosophers whose names endured through history. No, these were quieter, more subtle, echoes of minds that had brushed against knowledge only briefly, scribes who had traced a quill for the first time, students whose curiosity lingered only in fragments, and thinkers whose work had been lost to time. Their words drifted lazily through the library, soft as the rustle of vellum, faint as the flicker of lamplight on polished marble. Some voices murmured in response to the scrolls themselves, leaning close to the parchment as if drawn by the weight of centuries. A faint sigh followed a page as it turned of its own accord, a forgotten quill twitched slightly, leaving a delicate line that shimmered under the lamp's glow. The shadows seemed to bend toward these whispers, coiling around the stories as though to preserve them, carrying them softly along arches, pillars, and corridors. The library had become a vessel, cradling memory in its quiet, endless halls. Here and there, a fragment of a poem rose into the air, mingling with a historical account that had long been left to dust. Philosophical musings whispered questions that no one now lived to answer. Mathematical diagrams hovered in the faint light, their ink tracing invisible lines as though seeking an audience. Every rustle, every flicker, every slow, deliberate movement of shadow and quill was part of a delicate choreography, a dreamlike echo of curiosity that had once thrived in this space. The air was thick with memory, scented faintly with the musk of parchment and the trace of ink that centuries could not fully erase. A faint breeze drifted through latticed windows, carrying whispers further into the corridors, allowing them to fold gently over shelves and desks. Shadows stretched in response, elongating along marble floors and curling around arches, forming shapes that hinted at the presence of long-gone scholars. The voices wove together in a slow, hypnotic symphony, inviting anyone listening to drift alongside them into a meditative, almost sleepy state. Outside, the stars wheeled silently over Alexandria, silver light mingling with the amber glow of the lamps. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of light moved in harmony with the celestial rhythm. Time seemed to dissolve here, minutes stretched into hours, hours folded into centuries, and the library exhaled its collective breath in a steady, gentle cadence. In this stillness, the forgotten voices spoke not to be heard, but to be remembered. They did not demand attention, they simply existed, drifting through the corridors, brushing past scrolls, resting in the folds of shadow, and blending with the gentle heartbeat of the library itself. And for anyone present, awake or dreaming, their words carried the soft, serene pulse of centuries, an invitation to listen, to wander, and to rest in the calm, eternal embrace of Alexandria's night. The library had grown even quieter now, but within that silence, something subtle was awakening. Forgotten voices, once barely discernible, began to rise, threading through corridors and curling around the ancient shelves. They did not speak in words meant to command attention, but in soft murmurs, fragments of thought, and half-formed questions, drifting like motes of golden dust caught in the lamplight. Scrolls leaned ever so slightly as if drawn toward the echoes, and quills twitched faintly, leaving faint, shimmering trails of ink that seemed to float for a moment before settling back onto the parchment. Each flicker of lamp light cast shadows that stretched and merged with these whispers, forming delicate, undulating shapes on the marble floors. A faint draft from the latticed windows nudged the air, carrying these murmurs gently from one corridor to the next, weaving a calm, meditative rhythm that was both soothing and hypnotic. Some voices emerged from the oldest shelves, their words long forgotten even to memory. A fragment of poetry brushed past a historical account, a philosophical musing curled around a diagram of distant stars. Each whisper moved as though guided by invisible hands, following the lanterns and lamps, curling around arches and pillars, lingering for a moment in alcoves before drifting onward. The library became a labyrinth of soundless movement, a sanctuary where every motion carried meaning without urgency. The shadows responded with equal grace. Columns elongated, arches bent subtly, and even the marble floors seemed to pulse gently under the weight of centuries. The whispers flowed alongside these shadows, rising and falling in slow, deliberate undulations. Occasionally, a quill would rise slightly as if to write in midair, tracing invisible lines that mirrored the trajectory of drifting voices. Pages rustled softly, catching lamplight in faint, glimmering reflections that added to the hypnotic atmosphere. A faint scent of aged parchment, ink, and the distant Mediterranean drifted through the halls, blending with the golden lamplight and the soft shadows. Each breath of air seemed to carry centuries of thought, moving the whispers along paths they had never traversed in life. The interplay of light, shadow, and voice became a slow, meditative dance, inviting anyone wandering these halls to sink deeper into the timeless rhythm of the library. Above, the stars wheeled silently over Alexandria, their silver light mingling with the amber glow of lamps. The combined illumination traced soft arcs through the corridors, highlighting the drifting whispers and floating shadows. Every movement, every rustle, every flicker of light was synchronized with the library's gentle heartbeat, creating an endless, hypnotic loop of memory, imagination, and quiet reflection. In this space, the forgotten voices were no longer lost, they existed in harmony with the library itself, speaking softly to each other, to the scrolls, and to anyone willing to wander slowly through the halls. They were fragments of curiosity, inquiry, and wonder, carried gently on invisible currents, inviting the mind to drift without effort, to follow the path of memory, and to rest in the serene embrace of Alexandria's night. And as the library exhaled its long, deliberate breath, shadows and whispers entwined in perfect rhythm, the heart of knowledge pulsing gently beneath the calm, infinite quiet of the sleeping city. Image prompt for Part 5, Chapter 2. Ancient library at midnight, soft amber oil lamps illuminating towering shelves of scrolls, faint golden threads in the air representing whispered forgotten voices, shadows curling along marble floors and arches, quills leaving shimmering traces of ink, parchment rustling faintly, dreamy, serene, hypnotic, ultra-detailed, cinematic, magical sleepy atmosphere, echoes of long-lost scholars drifting through time. The whispers of forgotten voices grew stronger, weaving slowly through the corridors of the library. Each fragment, an unfinished poem, a half-formed calculation, a fleeting philosophical thought, began to drift along invisible currents, intertwining with other whispers in soft, undulating arcs. The movement was slow and deliberate, a gentle, meditative rhythm that encouraged the mind to wander, unhurried, among the fragments of centuries. Scrolls leaned subtly toward the drifting whispers, as if the parchment itself sought to catch every word. Quills, untouched for generations, twitched faintly, leaving delicate, shimmering lines that traced the curves of invisible stories. Shadows stretched along the marble floors and arches, curling and folding in harmony with the drifting words, forming shapes that hinted at figures long gone, their gestures frozen in time yet fluid in imagination. Every flicker of lamp light and every sway of a page joined in the quiet choreography. Some whispers merged into soft, ethereal narratives, forming stories that had never fully existed in the light of day. A student's first attempt at a poem brushed against a scholar's meticulous history of distant lands, a fragment of philosophy entwined with the arc of a celestial diagram. These fledgling tales floated lazily through the library, illuminated by the warm amber glow of the oil lamps. The shadows responded, stretching to trace invisible pathways along walls, floors, and arches, folding the whispers into elegant patterns of light and dark. The air carried the faint scent of ink, parchment, and Mediterranean salt, drifting through high-latticed windows. Every inhale seemed to pull the listener deeper into the library's embrace, where time stretched and folded around these soft, ephemeral stories. The whispers were patient, they did not demand attention, only gentle listening. Each soundless narrative invited wandering minds to drift alongside it, weightless, in a space where centuries of thought and memory coexisted without urgency. Above, the stars wheeled silently across the night sky, their silver light mingling with the amber glow of the lamps. The library became a luminous labyrinth, where shadows and whispers interlaced into a tapestry of gentle motion. Fragments of forgotten songs brushed softly against philosophical treatises, traces of ink shimmered faintly as if alive, scrolls hummed quietly with thoughts too delicate to be spoken aloud. Everything moved in slow, meditative unison, a lullaby of presence and memory, of light and shadow, of centuries held in gentle suspension. In this stillness, the library's forgotten voices became more than echoes. They became threads, delicate and luminous, linking stories across time, folding past and present into a seamless, drifting rhythm. Every whisper, every trembling quill, every flicker of shadow was part of a larger pattern, a soft, hypnotic dance that invited anyone wandering through the halls to let the mind drift, to dream, and to sleep alongside the library itself. And in this quiet, infinite ballet, Alexandria's library whispered its eternal truth, that no voice is ever truly lost, that every fragment of thought lives on in shadow, in light, in the gentle drifting of memory through the corridors of time. For those who listened, the library offered the softest of lullabies, carrying them effortlessly into the calm, infinite night. By the deepest hour of the night, the library had become a world suspended between memory and dream. Shadows stretched along marble floors and arches, curling gently around towering shelves of scrolls and codices. The forgotten voices, once faint murmurs, now drifted more cohesively, weaving together like threads in an intricate tapestry. Each fragment of thought, every whispered poem, every half-formed calculation moved slowly, guided by invisible currents, blending seamlessly into a meditative rhythm. The lanterns and oil lamps cast warm, golden light over the corridors, illuminating traces of ink left by quills that had long since fallen silent. Shadows danced lazily in response, folding around the whispers, echoing the soft undulations of stories that had lingered for centuries. Scrolls leaned subtly toward one another, their edges trembling in recognition, forming delicate, almost imperceptible arcs that carried the forgotten voices along the aisles. Fragments of poetry brushed against historical accounts, philosophical musings intertwined with diagrams of stars and maps of faraway lands. The whispers became a soft, continuous melody, moving like drifting ribbons of light through the library's arches and alcoves. Shadows lengthened and shortened in harmony, curling along the marble floors and columns to follow the gentle paths of these stories. The interplay of illumination, whisper, and shadow created a hypnotic ballet, slow and deliberate, inviting anyone present to breathe deeply, relax, and drift. The scent of ancient parchment mingled with ink and the faint saltiness of the Mediterranean breeze that slipped through the high latticed windows. The air carried the whispers effortlessly, allowing them to fold over each other, to pause in alcoves, and to drift into corners of the library untouched for centuries. Each motion, every flicker of lamp flame, every sigh of paper, every coiling shadow, added a note to the library's quiet symphony, a lullaby of thought and memory that enveloped the entire space. Above, the stars wheeled silently across the night sky, their silver light mingling with the amber glow of lamps and lanterns. Shadows brushed along walls, floors, and arches, merging and separating in patterns that seemed alive with the pulse of centuries. The forgotten voices rose and fell in gentle waves, whispering not to be heard but to exist, to mingle, to drift, and to soothe. Their rhythm was slow, patient, eternal, inviting anyone wandering the corridors to surrender to the serenity of the night. In this sublime stillness, the library became a living lullaby. Every element, the drifting lanterns, the coiling shadows, the rustling scrolls, the faint traces of ink, and the whispered thoughts of lost scholars, merged into one seamless, hypnotic experience. The whispers were no longer lost fragments but a harmonious chorus, a collective memory of curiosity, wonder, and quiet inquiry carried through time. And in that gentle crescendo, Alexandria's library held the heart of centuries in its marble embrace. The whispers, shadows, and light entwined into a soft, eternal pulse. Time ceased to matter, moments stretched into hours, hours folded into centuries, and the library exhaled, serene and infinite. Those who wandered its halls, awake or dreaming, felt the calm seep into their minds, the quiet, meditative pulse of knowledge cradled by history itself. The library slept. And in its sleep, it sang a lullaby of golden light, curling shadows, and forgotten voices, a slow, patient, infinite hum that carried all who listened into the deepest, most serene sleep of the night. By the quietest hour of the night, the library seemed to pulse with a life all its own. The lanterns had dimmed to a softer glow, oil lamps flickered lazily, and shadows stretched across marble floors and arches, curling around towering shelves of scrolls and codices. Somewhere deep within the labyrinth of knowledge, doors that had never been opened stirred gently, exhaling faint draughts as if breathing. The alcoves were older than memory, carved into the walls in places that seemed almost secret, their arches hidden beneath centuries of dust and shadow. The whispers of forgotten voices drifted near them, pausing as if curious, their murmurs barely audible over the soft sigh of the library itself. Every draft of air, every flicker of light, seemed to pull the doors slightly ajar, revealing faint glimmers of golden illumination from within. Scrolls on nearby shelves leaned subtly toward the alcoves, as if drawn to the hidden stories they contained. Quills twitched gently, leaving faint traces of ink that shimmered in the low light, forming delicate arcs and spirals that hinted at maps of places unseen and ideas half-remembered. Shadows, always attentive, bent around the alcoves, curling into shapes that suggested figures leaning in to peer at what lay behind the doors. The effect was hypnotic. The library itself seemed to guide the gaze, urging observers to notice, to listen, and to drift slowly into contemplation. Inside the alcoves, faint glimmers of light reflected off polished marble floors and gilded scroll cases. Ancient manuscripts, untouched for centuries, seemed to hum softly in the dim glow. The whispers of the library's forgotten voices swirled gently toward these hidden corners, brushing against the scrolls, forming delicate patterns in the air like ribbons of smoke. Each whisper hinted at stories long obscured, histories that had almost vanished, and thoughts that had floated unrecorded, waiting patiently for discovery. The air carried the familiar scent of aged parchment, ink, and faint salt from the Mediterranean outside. Each inhalation seemed to pull the listener deeper into the library's embrace, where time slowed, stretched, and folded in the rhythm of drifting lantern light, curling shadows, and soft murmurs. The doors themselves seemed alive, breathing in subtle arcs as if aware of every motion of light, shadow, and sound. Shadows curved along arches and columns, forming undulating shapes that suggested long-forgotten scholars and scribes moving gracefully through the silent corridors. The floating whispers intertwined with these shapes, following them through the alcoves, over polished floors, and into secret recesses where even the faintest candlelight had never reached. A map of a distant city shimmered softly in a corner, a fragment of poetry glimmered faintly on a scroll, a quill rose briefly as if guided by invisible hands, all participating in a slow, meditative rhythm orchestrated by the library itself. Above, the stars wheeled silently across the sky, silver light filtering through high latticed windows. The faint amber glow of the lamps and lanterns mixed with the celestial illumination, creating a dreamy, hypnotic atmosphere. Every breath of air, every flicker of shadow, every whisper of parchment contributed to a gentle, serene symphony, a lullaby that guided the mind to drift, float, and rest in the calm, infinite embrace of Alexandria's night. In these hidden alcoves, the library revealed a new dimension, a secret world of half-forgotten knowledge, softly glowing, waiting to be touched, heard, or dreamed into existence. And for those who lingered, wandering quietly among the marble floors and drifting light, every door seemed to promise discovery, soft, patient, and infinitely gentle, a slow, meditative journey into the heart of sleeping history itself. The hidden alcoves of the library seemed to hum with a quiet energy as midnight deepened. Lanterns drifted slowly down the corridors, their golden light brushing the edges of marble columns and the tops of towering shelves, spilling softly into corners that had been sealed for centuries. Each alcove, though small and shadowed, held the promise of a story untouched, a fragment of knowledge waiting patiently for the gentle caress of light. Within these alcoves, scrolls and codices leaned slightly as if recognizing the presence of drifting illumination. Whispers, soft, golden threads of soundless thought, began to curl delicately around the manuscripts, tracing the edges of parchment and brushing over faded ink. A fragment of poetry whispered in cadence with the flicker of a lantern flame, a half-formed mathematical diagram shivered faintly in recognition, its lines glimmering softly in the warm glow. The library itself seemed to breathe, exhaling slowly, as shadows shifted to accommodate the drifting, delicate voices. Quills left traces of ink, fine and shimmering, tracing arcs that mirrored the path of each lantern, as though recording invisible patterns for anyone who might follow. The shadows coiled around arches and shelves, curling in hypnotic spirals, bending toward the alcoves to illuminate secrets hidden within. The air carried the faint scent of ink and parchment, mingling with the subtle salt of the Mediterranean breeze that slipped through latticed windows, infusing the space with a gentle, meditative rhythm. Some alcoves revealed scrolls that glowed faintly, golden letters shimmering as if stirred by unseen hands. Whispers from forgotten voices brushed past one another, intertwining in slow, lazy waves. A philosophical note murmured softly to a historical account, a poetic fragment floated upward, carried by the subtle drafts, to meet a map of distant lands resting on a marble shelf. Each interaction created a soft ripple through the corridors, a rhythm so patient and deliberate that even time itself seemed to pause, stretching moments into hours, and hours into centuries. Above, the stars wheeled silently across the sky, silver light mingling with the lantern's warm glow. Shadows twisted and extended across marble floors and arches, folding over themselves and brushing against the floating whispers. Every element, the drifting lanterns, the murmuring scrolls, the shimmering traces of ink, the curling shadows, moved in harmony, orchestrated by the gentle heartbeat of the library. Each motion was slow, hypnotic, and meditative, inviting anyone present to sink deeper into the dreamlike rhythm of the night. In these alcoves, knowledge whispered to itself. The lanterns guided the stories, illuminating the edges of forgotten thoughts, while shadows cradled the fragile traces of memory. Whispers drifted lazily between scrolls, sometimes joining, sometimes diverging, weaving a tapestry of light, shadow, and thought that existed outside of time. The library had become a sanctuary not only of history but of infinite patience, a place where every fragment, every word, every trace of ink was allowed to exist fully, quietly, and without hurry. And as the night deepened, the alcoves themselves seemed to hum in unison, breathing softly, exhaling centuries of thought, carrying the wandering lanterns, whispers, and shadows into a slow, hypnotic cadence. It was a lullaby, not of music, but of presence, an invitation to drift, to dream, and to rest, cradled by the serene, eternal embrace of Alexandria's sleeping library. The hidden alcove seemed to breathe in rhythm with the library itself. Lanterns drifted slowly, brushing golden light across the tops of marble shelves and spilling into corners where centuries-old scrolls rested in quiet anticipation. The air carried the faint rustle of parchment, a soft, meditative sound that mingled with the distant murmurs of forgotten voices, now more insistent yet still gentle, like a lullaby urging the mind to drift. Scrolls shifted subtly, leaning toward the drifting lanterns, their edges trembling as if stretching after a long, timeless sleep. Quills twitched with faint arcs of shimmering ink, tracing invisible lines that echoed the flow of light. Faint shadows folded and curled around the alcoves, elongating gracefully across marble floors, brushing softly over arches, and wrapping the manuscripts in delicate, protective arcs. The library seemed alive, yet calm, orchestrating every flicker, whisper, and movement into a hypnotic rhythm. Some scrolls began to whisper more fully, their fragments coalescing into dreamlike stories. A forgotten poem brushed against a treatise on celestial movements, its words curling in gentle spirals through the warm lamplight. A map of a distant city shimmered faintly as whispers traced the paths of streets, rivers, and plazas long erased from memory. Every fragment of thought drifted along slow, invisible currents, meeting other pieces of forgotten knowledge, intertwining into subtle narratives that pulsed lazily through the corridors. The lanterns floated patiently, guiding these emerging stories with golden halos of light. Shadows responded in perfect synchrony, curling along arches and columns, coiling around shelves, and following the rhythm of drifting whispers. The air was thick with the scent of ink, aged parchment, and the faint salt of the Mediterranean breeze that entered through latticed windows. Each breath seemed to carry centuries of thought, folding it softly into the library's gentle heartbeat. Above, the stars wheeled silently, silver threads of light mingling with the lantern's warm glow. Shadows elongated, danced, and bent toward the alcoves, as if eager to witness the awakening of hidden knowledge. Whispers merged into slow, curling waves, brushing across quills and parchment, creating delicate arcs of shimmering light. The library's pulse was steady, unhurried, infinite, a rhythm that invited the mind to float weightlessly, to surrender to the gentle flow of time and memory. In the alcoves, the hidden stories reached full awareness, coalescing into fragile, ethereal patterns that glimmered faintly in the warm light. They spoke softly, not to be heard but to be experienced, drifting slowly through space, intertwining with shadows, floating lanterns, and the silent gaze of marble statues that had long observed the corridors. Every detail, the quills, the rustling parchment, the curling shadows, the drifting lanterns, participated in a quiet ballet, a lullaby of presence and memory, of thought and time, slow and meditative. And as the library exhaled its long, deliberate breath, the alcoves glowed softly, whispering with infinite patience, guiding wandering minds into gentle dreams. The hidden scrolls, awakened at last, became part of the library's eternal rhythm, moving in perfect harmony with light, shadow, and whispers, creating a serene, hypnotic crescendo that carried all who lingered into the calm, infinite sleep of Alexandria's night. Beyond the towering shelves and marble arches of the library, a hidden doorway led to a vast conservatory, a secret garden bathed in the soft glow of floating lanterns and flickering oil lamps. The air was warmer here, carrying the faint scent of earth and leaves mingled with the familiar musk of parchment and ink. Every step echoed softly along marble pathways lined with creeping vines, ancient trees, and clusters of flowering plants, each rustling gently in response to unseen currents of air. The trees grew taller than any ceiling, their branches stretching across arches and intertwining with chandeliers of lanterns. Leaves trembled softly, brushing against the edges of scrolls carefully stacked on stone pedestals, as if exchanging whispers with the manuscripts themselves. The sound was almost imperceptible, a soft susurration like distant seas or gentle sighs, blending perfectly with the faint murmurs of the library's forgotten voices. Lanterns floated lazily above the garden paths, their golden light glinting off leaves, reflecting off veins and dew, creating a slow, hypnotic dance of illumination and shadow. Shadows stretched long across marble floors, curling gracefully around columns and pedestals, intertwining with the soft rustle of foliage. Every flicker of light, every wave of shadow, every gentle murmur of leaves contributed to a quiet rhythm, a meditative lullaby that wrapped the garden in serene, timeless calm. Quills left delicate traces of shimmering ink on scrolls placed on stone benches beneath the trees. Each stroke traced invisible arcs that mimicked the curves of branches and vines, joining in subtle harmony with the whispers of leaves and the soft glow of lanterns. A fragment of poetry drifted lazily along a vine, brushing against flowering petals. Historical notes settled onto a pedestal as if embraced by roots. A philosophical question fluttered faintly in the air, caught between the tremble of leaves and the curve of shadows. The conservatory seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling with a slow, patient rhythm. Branches bent gently, guiding lantern light toward hidden corners, leaves tilted slightly to catch the whispers drifting from nearby alcoves, shadows stretched and recoiled along the marble floor as if participating in a silent, meditative dance. Every element, light, shadow, leaf, scroll, and quill, moved together in slow motion, creating a hypnotic atmosphere that invited wandering minds to float, to drift, and to rest. Above, the stars wheeled silently across the night sky, their silver glow filtering through latticed windows and gaps in the conservatory roof. The golden lanterns mingled with celestial light, creating a tapestry of warmth and cool shimmer that made every leaf, every scroll, every shadow glimmer with gentle life. Whispers of forgotten voices wove through the branches and leaves, brushing softly against quills and parchment, joining the soft, hypnotic melody of the garden. In this serene space, the library revealed a new dimension, a garden of whispering leaves where knowledge and nature intertwined. Every rustle of a leaf, every shimmer of lantern light, every drifting whisper was part of a gentle, unhurried lullaby, a slow, infinite rhythm that encouraged the mind to drift, float, and rest beneath the quiet, eternal embrace of Alexandria's sleeping library. At the center of the conservatory lay a pool of still water, its surface smooth and undisturbed, reflecting every arch, lantern, and shadow above with perfect clarity. Golden lanterns floated lazily around it, their soft light casting gentle ripples across the water whenever a subtle draft passed through the marble corridors. The pool seemed to hold time itself, capturing centuries of whispered voices, drifting shadows, and rustling leaves in a serene, infinite mirror. The air was heavy with calm. Leaves from surrounding trees brushed lightly against the marble edges, sending soft murmurs into the quiet. Scrolls resting nearby trembled faintly, their quills leaving shimmering trails of ink that traced arcs mirroring the pool's reflective surface. Even shadows moved slower here, curling gently along the floors, stretching toward the water, and hovering over lantern-lit branches, as though drawn to the pool's hypnotic embrace. Fragments of forgotten voices drifted lazily along the water, their echoes mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft flicker of lantern light. A half-forgotten poem glimmered briefly across the surface, its letters folding into delicate patterns that rippled slowly as though breathing. A fragment of an ancient map shimmered faintly, tracing invisible paths of trade routes and distant lands, merging imperceptibly with reflections of arches, trees, and lanterns. Every ripple, every murmur, every shadow became part of a slow, meditative rhythm, a lullaby in liquid form. The lanterns themselves seemed to pause here, hovering slightly lower as if to witness the quiet spectacle. Golden light shimmered across the pool, catching the edges of leaves, the tips of scrolls, and the curves of shadows, weaving a soft tapestry of illumination. The air was thick with the scent of parchment, ink, and earth, blended with the faint saltiness of Mediterranean breezes drifting through high latticed windows. Each inhalation carried a trace of centuries, folding past and present together over the glassy water. Above, the stars wheeled slowly across the night sky, their silver light mingling with the amber lantern glow. Reflections of celestial light and golden lamplight rippled together, bending and folding in patterns that mirrored the library's drifting whispers and curling shadows. A fragment of philosophy, a quiet fragment of history, a fluttering note of poetry, all seemed to dance gently across the surface of the pool, merging into a single, hypnotic, and meditative flow. The conservatory's silence deepened, filled with the subtle chorus of water, light, shadow, and voice. Leaves rustled lazily, lanterns drifted in measured arcs, scrolls whispered softly, and shadows curled in unhurried spirals along marble floors and arches. Every element participated in a delicate, infinite rhythm, inviting the mind to drift, the body to relax, and the imagination to float alongside the reflections. In this quiet, timeless space, the pool became more than water. It was memory made visible, reflection made tangible, and time made gentle. Every whisper, every ripple, every flicker of light and shadow contributed to a soft, hypnotic lullaby, a serene invitation to rest, dream, and drift in the slow, infinite heartbeat of Alexandria's sleeping library. By the quietest hour, the conservatory had become a sanctuary of stillness, a place where the library itself seemed to breathe slowly, gently, as if rocking centuries of memory to sleep. Lanterns floated lazily above the trees, their golden light casting arcs across the marble floors and reflecting softly on the central pool. Shadows curled around arches, pedestals, and scrolls, intertwining with leaves, vines, and the gentle ripples of water, forming a slow, meditative rhythm that carried the mind into gentle drift. The leaves whispered softly among themselves, brushing against scrolls and pedestals with a hushed intimacy. Each flutter was echoed by the faint tremor of quills, leaving delicate arcs of shimmering ink across parchment, tracing invisible threads that mirrored the soft motion of floating lanterns. Every rustle of foliage, every curling shadow, every shimmer of water, became part of the same unhurried cadence, a lullaby of presence and memory. The reflecting pool, central to the conservatory, held the combined history of the library in its calm, glassy surface. Shadows and lanterns rippled across it in soft, hypnotic waves, merging centuries of whispers, fragments, and forgotten thoughts. A fragment of poetry drifted across the water, brushing a ripple against the reflection of a tree, a faint historical note shimmered near a lantern's glow, philosophical musings from long-lost minds glided softly in invisible currents. The pool absorbed them all, uniting light, shadow, and voice into a slow, mesmerizing symphony. Every corner of the conservatory contributed to the serene pulse. Branches swayed gently, guiding lantern light over hidden alcoves, vines stretched lazily across pedestals, folding into the golden glow, shadows elongated, recoiled, and entwined across floors and arches in unhurried patterns. The whispers of forgotten voices flowed along these paths, touching scrolls, leaves, water, and marble alike, creating a tapestry of calm and hypnotic beauty. Above, the stars wheeled silently across the night sky, their silver glow mingling with the amber lantern light. The conservatory's arches reflected these celestial patterns, doubling and bending them in soft, undulating waves. Every ripple of water, every quiver of leaf, every flicker of shadow moved in concert, like a slow, infinite heartbeat guiding the library, and all who wandered within, into serene slumber. In this gentle, timeless space, knowledge, nature, and memory converged. The conservatory's whispers, leaves, lanterns, shadows, and water were no longer separate, they had become a single, breathing organism, pulsing with calm, patient, hypnotic energy. Every element existed for itself yet contributed to a larger, soothing cadence, inviting anyone present to float gently alongside it, drifting effortlessly into the embrace of Alexandria's sleeping library. And as the library exhaled, a final hush settled over the conservatory. Lanterns drifted lower, shadows folded gracefully along the marble floors, leaves trembled once more and stilled, the reflecting pool mirrored every detail perfectly, and the whispers of forgotten voices became a soft, continuous hum. Time ceased to matter. Moments stretched into centuries. The conservatory, and the library itself, slept, carrying all who lingered into the calmest, deepest, and most serene slumber imaginable. As the night deepened, the library revealed a quieter, more secretive realm, its chamber of nocturnal curiosities. Here, artifacts long forgotten rested on pedestals of marble, glass cases, and carved shelves. Ancient instruments, delicate sculptures, and mysterious relics basked in the golden glow of floating lanterns. The air carried the faint scent of aged wood, metal, and parchment, blending with the subtle, ever-present salt of the Mediterranean breeze drifting through high windows. The lanterns drifted lazily above each display, illuminating surfaces with gentle warmth. Shadows stretched and curled along the marble floors, wrapping the artifacts in slow, meditative arcs. Even the whispers of forgotten voices seemed to soften here, brushing lightly against the relics as if exchanging quiet greetings. The library had grown deliberate in its silence, and every sound, each rustle of parchment, every tremor of shadow, and the faint shimmer of quills, became part of a hypnotic, sleepy cadence. A delicate astrolabe turned slowly on its pedestal, guided not by human hands but by the subtle current of the library itself. Its shadow traced intricate, looping patterns across nearby walls, dancing among ancient scrolls and manuscripts. Nearby, a small statue of an unknown figure tilted slightly as if bowing to the drifting lanterns. The movement was imperceptible, yet the combination of light, shadow, and artifact created a soft, hypnotic rhythm that invited any wandering mind to drift alongside it. Scrolls rested nearby, edges curling slightly toward the warm lantern light. Quills traced faint, shimmering arcs of ink across parchment, mirroring the slow rotations of brass instruments and the gentle sway of shadows. Fragments of forgotten voices intertwined with these movements, forming a quiet, meditative melody that carried centuries of thought, observation, and wonder. A half-written poem brushed against a fragment of mathematical theory, a philosophical note nudged gently at a sketch of distant stars, every detail rippled softly across the chamber in harmonious, unhurried cadence. Above, the stars wheeled silently through the latticed windows, silver light mingling with the amber glow of lanterns. Shadows coiled and stretched along arches, pedestals, and floors, following the invisible rhythm of whispers, quills, and drifting light. The artifacts seemed alive in this interplay, not by force, but through gentle invitation, responding to every flicker, every tremor, every murmur, as if the library itself conducted a lullaby composed of centuries of curiosity and knowledge. Even the air seemed to move in measured, hypnotic waves, guiding the faint murmur of voices and the soft rustle of leaves from nearby conservatories toward this chamber. Every artifact, every quill, every shadow, and every whisper was part of an unhurried, meditative cadence. The library had become a living organism of light, shadow, and sound, a place where memory, imagination, and sleep converged into a serene, gentle lullaby. In the chamber of nocturnal curiosities, nothing was hurried, nothing demanded attention. Every relic, instrument, and manuscript existed in harmony, floating through the amberlit corridors in slow, hypnotic arcs. The whispers, shadows, and lanterns intertwined with one another and with the artifacts, forming a tapestry of calm, sleepy beauty. Time slowed here, every second stretching into a reflective, infinite pulse, guiding any observer into gentle drift, into quiet, and into sleep. The library exhaled softly, and the artifacts gleamed faintly in the golden glow. Shadows and whispers intertwined across the floors and arches, carrying all who lingered into a world where history, mystery, and infinite calm merged in perfect harmony. The chamber of nocturnal curiosity seemed to awaken slowly, though not in the usual sense. There was no rush, no sudden motion, only a gentle, deliberate stirring, as if the artifacts themselves were breathing in time with the library. Lanterns drifted lazily above the pedestals, casting warm golden arcs that brushed over polished wood, brass instruments, delicate sculptures, and stacks of scrolls. Shadows stretched and curled around every surface, responding to the subtle rhythm of the drifting light. A small astrolabe turned imperceptibly, tracing intricate patterns across the marble floor. Each rotation caught the lantern's glow, sending shimmering reflections across nearby scrolls, while the faint whispers of forgotten voices followed its movement like invisible threads. Quills on adjacent pedestals trembled lightly, leaving shimmering arcs of ink across parchment, mirroring the gentle arcs of shadow and light. Every sound, every glimmer, every flutter of parchment moved in harmony with the chamber's soft, hypnotic cadence. A delicate statuette, poised on a high pedestal, tilted slightly toward the lanterns, its shadow stretching across a nearby marble arch. The artifact did not move alone, it seemed to respond to the quiet whispers of forgotten knowledge, bending toward them, acknowledging them, joining the soft symphony of time and memory. Nearby, a bronze compass rotated slowly, tracing faint, glimmering circles on a worn table, as if mapping invisible currents of thought. Scrolls leaned subtly toward one another, exchanging fragments of poems, mathematical musings, and philosophical observations. Whispers drifted lazily along these curves, weaving invisible threads between text, ink, and marble, creating a tapestry of sound and light that pulsed with centuries of patient observation. A half-finished historical account brushed against a fragment of an ancient star chart, a poetic line from a lost poet mingled with the curve of a vine creeping from the conservatory beyond. Everything moved in slow, unhurried arcs, forming a gentle, meditative rhythm that invited anyone present to drift alongside it. Above, the stars wheeled silently across the night sky, their silver glow slipping through latticed windows and mingling with the warm amber light of the lanterns. Shadows stretched in delicate spirals, bending over pedestals, instruments, and scrolls, brushing against the faint glimmer of quill trails. Every detail, the rustle of leaves drifting from adjacent conservatories, the shimmer of lantern light across marble, the sigh of parchment, joined together into a hypnotic, sleep-inducing melody. Time had softened here, losing urgency. The artifacts, lanterns, shadows, and whispers formed a single, flowing organism. Each element existed for itself but contributed to a broader rhythm, a lullaby of memory, observation, and quiet wonder. The library had become a place where history and mystery merged in gentle arcs of light and sound, encouraging wandering minds to drift slowly, to float effortlessly, and to rest. And so, the nocturnal curiosities moved together in their silent, hypnotic ballet. The pool of reflection from nearby conservatories, the whispering leaves, and the artifacts all harmonized with lantern light and shadow, creating a single, continuous pulse of serenity. The library exhaled gently, and the chamber became a cradle of infinite calm, a place where whispers, light, shadow, and knowledge wrapped every visitor in the deepest, most meditative sleep. By the late hours of the night, the chamber of nocturnal curiosities had settled into a serene, meditative rhythm. Lanterns floated gently above the pedestals, their soft amber glow reflecting off delicate instruments, sculptures, and ancient scrolls. Shadows curled and stretched across marble floors and arches, following the slow arcs of drifting light. Every element, the faint tremble of quills, the rustle of parchment, the gentle sway of lanterns, and the whispering artifacts, merged into a quiet symphony of calm, inviting wandering minds to drift effortlessly. The astrolabe on its pedestal spun slowly, tracing intricate patterns of reflection across the marble. Each rotation caught the lantern light, scattering golden threads across the floor and walls. A small bronze compass rotated in gentle arcs, aligning with invisible currents of thought, its shadows dancing delicately along surrounding scrolls. Nearby, a delicate statuette tilted ever so slightly, its shadow merging with the long, curling silhouettes of arches and pillars. Even the faint drafts from nearby conservatories seemed to pause, allowing every detail in the chamber to move in perfect, unhurried harmony. Whispers of forgotten voices floated among the artifacts, threading through quills, parchment, and marble pedestals. Fragments of poetry brushed against mathematical diagrams, historical records conversed with philosophical musings, and ancient maps of distant lands intertwined subtly with sketches of the stars. Each element responded to the others, forming an intricate, hypnotic pattern, soft and slow, like a lullaby that wrapped the library itself in the gentle rhythm of centuries. The golden lanterns drifted lower, their light caressing each artifact with tender warmth. Shadows curled closer, folding around pedestals and scrolls, hugging them in soft arcs. Leaves from nearby conservatories brushed faintly against the edges of manuscripts, adding a subtle whisper to the symphony of murmurs. The reflecting pools from distant alcoves shimmered in the lantern glow, carrying fragments of movement and light across the chamber like liquid threads of memory. Above, stars wheeled silently across the night sky, their silver glow mingling with the amber of the lanterns. Every ripple of light, every flicker of shadow, every sigh of parchment moved in unison, orchestrated by the library's slow, deliberate heartbeat. Time itself seemed to bend in the chamber, stretching minutes into hours and hours into centuries, as though the library intended to cradle every thought, every artifact, every whisper in its patient, eternal embrace. And then, in perfect harmony, the artifacts, lanterns, shadows, and whispers coalesced. The astrolabe traced its final, gentle arc. The statuette leaned into the amber glow. The compass rested in quiet alignment. Quills trembled softly, leaving faint shimmering trails on parchment. Leaves stilled above the pedestals. Shadows softened, lanterns floated slower, and whispers became a continuous, undulating hum. The entire chamber pulsed with a slow, infinite rhythm, a lullaby of presence, knowledge, and memory. In that moment, the library exhaled deeply. Every relic, every scroll, every instrument, every shadow, every lantern, and every whisper joined in a serene, hypnotic slumber. The nocturnal curiosities rested peacefully, bathed in warm light and quiet shadow, and the chamber became a cradle of infinite calm, a perfect, meditative haven where time dissolved, minds drifted, and the gentle pulse of Alexandria's sleeping library carried all into the deepest, most serene rest. Beyond the familiar corridors and lantern-lit alcoves of the library lay a hidden chamber that few had ever glimpsed, the Celestial Archive. The air here carried a delicate chill, scented faintly with parchment, ink, and the subtle brine of the Mediterranean night. Lanterns drifted overhead, casting soft golden pools of light across the marble floor, but the room seemed alive with an ethereal glow that did not come from flame or shadow alone. Rows of scrolls and codices stretched higher than the eye could follow, each inscribed with fragments of the cosmos. Diagrams of stars, planets, and comets shimmered faintly on delicate parchment, their ink catching the drifting lantern light in soft arcs of gold and silver. Quills rested beside open manuscripts, occasionally leaving a subtle shimmer as though stirred by invisible fingers. Shadows curled and stretched across the shelves and arches, echoing the slow rotations of distant celestial bodies, moving in deliberate, hypnotic rhythm. Above, the domed ceiling of the chamber mirrored the night sky. Tiny silver flecks of light twinkled as if the heavens themselves had been captured and hung above the library. The lantern's golden glow mingled with the celestial silver, weaving delicate patterns across the marble floors, arches, and open scrolls. Every ripple of light seemed to dance to a rhythm older than memory, guiding whispers, quills, shadows, and leaves in a quiet, infinite ballet. Whispers flowed slowly through the celestial archive, soft murmurs of forgotten astronomers, mathematicians, and poets mingling with the gentle sighs of parchment. Fragments of charts brushed against lines of poetry, half-formed equations brushed softly against sketches of constellations. The air seemed to vibrate gently with centuries of observation, reflection, and meditation. Every detail, the quills, the shadows, the shimmering ink, the drifting lanterns, joined together into a slow, hypnotic cadence, like a lullaby sung by the library itself. A celestial globe, perched delicately on a carved pedestal, rotated imperceptibly. Its shadow traced arcs along the marble floor, brushing against rows of scrolls filled with the secrets of the stars. Nearby, a small telescope angled slightly toward the domed ceiling, capturing glimmers of silver light and reflecting them softly across ancient maps of distant worlds. Lanterns drifted lower, brushing the tops of shelves and illuminating delicate diagrams of orbits, eclipses, and planetary paths, revealing hidden patterns that whispered quietly of cosmic harmony. Every element in the celestial archive moved in slow, deliberate arcs, folding time, space, and thought into a meditative rhythm. Shadows merged with light, whispers intertwined with parchment, quills traced invisible paths across celestial charts. The room pulsed softly, a heartbeat that invited wandering minds to drift, float, and rest among stars and scrolls alike. Time had lost its urgency here, minutes stretched into hours, hours into centuries, and all who lingered felt the gentle pull of a serene, infinite calm. Finally, the library exhaled. Lanterns floated slower, shadows softened across arches and floors, quills shimmered faintly and stilled, and whispers folded into a continuous, delicate hum. The celestial archive glowed faintly, a soft aurora of gold and silver, as though the stars themselves had descended to cradle every scroll, artifact, and thought. In this chamber, knowledge, memory, and celestial wonder merged into a single, gentle rhythm. And so, the celestial archive slept, holding within it the infinite calm of the library, the quiet hum of drifting lanterns, the tender murmur of whispers, and the gentle pulse of stars captured in parchment. Every visitor, every scroll, every quill, every shadow, and every flicker of light became part of this serene, meditative lullaby, a slow, hypnotic journey into the deepest, most peaceful slumber beneath Alexandria's sleeping library. The night had deepened into a velvet stillness, a calm that seemed older than memory itself. The library's corridors, alcoves, and secret chambers, conservatories, celestial archives, and the quiet aisles of scrolls, had grown silent, yet alive in a way that only the oldest knowledge could be. Lanterns floated lazily, casting gentle arcs of amber across marble floors and arches, illuminating stacks of manuscripts, delicate instruments, and relics that had rested for centuries. Every shadow stretched in slow, unhurried curves, curling around pedestals, scrolls, and arches in perfect harmony with the drifting whispers. A faint hum, imperceptible to hurried minds but present to anyone attuned to the rhythm of the library, filled the air. It was a slow, pulsing vibration, the heartbeat of centuries of thought, observation, and quiet labor. The library inhaled delicately, drawing in the soft sighs of parchment, the tremble of quills, the rustle of leaves from conservatories, and the gentle lap of reflecting pools. Then, in a movement so gradual it could almost be mistaken for nothing, it exhaled. A wave of warmth, shadow, and whispering light rolled gently through every hall, brushing along scrolls, lanterns, marble floors, and artifacts alike. Scrolls tilted slightly toward the drifting lanterns, as if breathing alongside them. Quills traced faint, shimmering arcs of ink across parchment in perfect unison with the rise and fall of shadow and light. Leaves trembled softly in conservatories, brushing against marble pedestals and manuscripts with whispering caresses. Even the celestial charts in the distant archives seemed to shimmer in response, tracing constellations in slow arcs that mirrored the pulse of the library itself. Every element, light, shadow, ink, parchment, leaf, water, artifact, joined together in a single, unhurried rhythm. The golden lanterns cast pools of warmth across arches and floors, merging with the silver glimmer of starlight through latticed windows. Shadows coiled, stretched, and intertwined along marble, tracing slow, hypnotic arcs. Whispers of forgotten voices, poets, philosophers, astronomers, and scholars, folded gently into one another, forming a continuous, meditative melody that seemed to embrace the entire structure. The library's exhalation grew ever slower, more deliberate. Time softened and stretched. Minutes became hours, hours became centuries, and the very air seemed saturated with patience and serenity. Every scroll, quill, artifact, and lantern floated in gentle arcs, moving in perfect synchrony with the library's heartbeat. Even the reflecting pools from distant conservatories shimmered in slow waves, carrying fragments of light, shadow, and whispered knowledge across the vast, silent corridors. Above, the stars wheeled silently, their silver light blending seamlessly with the amber lantern glow. Every ripple, every flicker, every sigh, every tremble participated in a unified cadence, a lullaby so infinite and patient that it invited all minds to surrender, to drift, to float, and to rest. The library's breath became a wave of calm, washing over every artifact, every manuscript, every corner, until nothing remained awake except the gentle pulse of presence itself.